Hello and welcome, everyone. We're at the 10:30 a.m. session, California's Economic Outlook. We're joined by Irina Asmundsson, Chief Economist at the California Department of Finance. And Irina, we're so excited to hear your thoughts on the state of California's economy during this time. And also, I'm just really tickled to introduce another Irina at this conference. So, welcome, Irina. The virtual stage is yours.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much to the organizers for inviting me. I am an MIT alum. I graduated in 1998. I had majored in mathematics and economics. So I'm thrilled to be talking to all of you, and I hope that we can have some time for some questions at the end. So before I dig into the economy, because this is an AI conference, I wanted to point out some parallels that I've been seeing between what economists are going through and what people who work in AI, I think, are probably also going through. So, the COVID-19 pandemic has really been just completely unprecedented. We have our models, we fit to our models, but when we have these huge disruptions, like we have with this pandemic where everything is upended, we realize that the data that we have from the past isn't really a predictor of the future. And so we are having to look at the fundamentals and dig into sort of what we think is going to happen and how the different individuals are going to act and how that's going to come out to a new equilibrium. In AI, I know that you fit the models to past data, but I do want to caution you, just like with the economy, you could come up with situations where it just is completely different. So let's dig in. All right. So this is the California and United States unemployment rates. This is from the May revision forecast that we did. We locked this down in mid-April. The US numbers, by the way, were locked down in early April. So at that point, you can see that they thought that US unemployment rates were only going to be about 10% at the peak. We now know that that's totally wrong. They're much higher, and they might be higher for a long time. At the time, we were looking at what was happening in California. And in our May revision forecast, we assumed and we projected that California unemployment was going to peak at around 25%. That hasn't quite happened, but it hasn't happened for a terrible reason, which is a whole bunch of people stopped looking for work. So when you look at the number of people who are out of work compared to what we had in February, then that 25% unemployment rate is probably pretty accurate. We also did an alternate forecast where we showed what might happen if California went into an extended disruption. So if we didn't get control of the public health situation, then unemployment would continue going up. So, you can see how unprecedented this is. This chart goes back all the way to 1980. The shaded parts are previous recessions. You can see that unemployment for both the US and California, it goes up, it comes down, goes up, it comes down. The Great Recession, the most recent one, where California got to about 12% unemployment and the US got to about 10% unemployment, we thought, oh, surely the next recession isn't going to be that bad. And we were very surprised. So we're in an unprecedented situation. We're all having to figure this out together. All right. This looks at non-farm payroll jobs. So this is a chart that economists like to use to try and figure out how does this recession compare to previous recessions in terms of how deep it's going to be, what percent of jobs have been lost. That's the vertical axis. And how long it's going to take jobs to recover to their pre-recession peak. So the blue line in the middle that goes down pretty fast and then recovers quite sharply, that's our current baseline projection. So we are saying quite optimistically, I think, that we are having this short, sharp shock, and then we are going to recover in about 6.5 years. So according to our current projections, we think that we're going to get back to 2019 levels of jobs in California by about 2026. And again, as you can see, that is quite optimistic. We also show the extended disruption where jobs continue falling until the beginning of 2021 and then start recovering. That's a very scary situation because that shows that if you have too long of a disruption, a lot of businesses aren't going to be able to make it. all of those small restaurants, which actually employ quite a lot of people, other small businesses that are in the service sector, they're just going to go out of business because they can't make it. So we're trying very hard to stabilize that situation. We are actively working with the federal government to try and stabilize that situation because we don't want to go into that extended disruption. All right, final slide. I'm really happy that we have so many MIT alum and technical people in this audience because this is a chart that generally I have to spend some time explaining. All right, so the vertical axis is the average wages in this particular industry sector. The horizontal blue line at 74,500, that is the average wage in California amongst all the sectors in 2019. The size of the bubbles tells you how many people were employed in that sector in 2019. And then because we wanted to do a comparison to the previous pre-recession peak, we compared what we think is going to happen in 2020 to 2007. So 2007 was the pre-recession peak before the Great Recession. And then you can see how things have changed since then. So you can see that really big round sphere over on the right-hand side, health and educational services, that's driven a huge amount of job growth over the last 10 years, over the last 13 years, honestly. It was the one sector that during the Great Recession never shrank. It just continued growing. That is a function of our aging population. So California is aging, the US is aging, the baby boomers are approaching retirement. It's one reason why this recession is a little bit scarier than the last recession, because people don't have as much time to be in the labor force to make up their retirement savings. So you can see health and educational services, a huge driver of jobs in the last couple of years. It's below average wages. The tech sector, which a lot of you are in, tend to be placed into the information sector, which is the highest average wage, and the professional, scientific, technical services and management of companies, which has been bigger. So those are relatively small sectors when you look at overall. They've driven a lot of the wage growth. So what you can see from this chart is that inequality has been increasing by quite a lot. A lot of the jobs that have been added are lower wage jobs. You can also see that a lot of those lower wage jobs that are large, for example, retail, trade, and leisure and hospitality, which are in the bottom left quadrant, those have lost a lot of jobs and they're below average wages. One of the scary statistics that I often mention, unfortunately, is that 1 in 5 California households pays at least 50% of their income in housing costs. Think about that. So that was from 2018, 1 in 5. 20% of all households in California were on the edge of homelessness if they had 2 earners and one of them lost their job. We are unfortunately seeing some of the consequences of that inequality that's been increasing. A lot of people are a little bit worried about AI because they think that it's going to increase these trends. It's going to increase the wages and the demand for people who can deal with the AI and deal with this automation, but it's really going to leave a lot of people out. So one final thought before I open this up to questions. A lot of people ask me about universal basic income. So the thing that I say in response to universal basic income is that it is a wonderful idea. It would be lovely if we could think that people are just going to have the time and the space to be innovative and to think and, you know, to have that level of comfort that universal basic income could provide them. Unfortunately, the people who would end up paying taxes to support universal basic income are the same people who are generating all this wealth. They are the ones who are doing all of this innovation. It's probably people like you. And you could, in fact, have a business model that employs a whole lot of people at a living wage and get work out of people instead of paying huge taxes to pay for universal basic income. So that's kind of the choice that's before us. You know, a lot of times when people think about the economy, they think, oh, well, I don't have an effect on the economy. But the economy that we have is the product of all of our individual choices. And so I think that we are in a space where a lot of us are being reminded of that. There is systemic racism. George Floyd and Black Lives Matter have really pointed out that the system that we have is not necessarily a meritocratic system. And if we want to change that, we're going to have to make some choices. But I am hopeful that people can make different choices. I'll stop there. Questions?
Well, first off, Irina, thank you so much for that. I mean, you've covered so many topics. I'm just sitting here recovering, but yes, we have questions coming in. So while I recover, I'll read some off to you. So first off, from Sergey, we've got a question. Do state unemployment forecasts take into account population migration that might be brought about by COVID and the shift to remote work?
That is a great question. So our population projections, in general, so stylized facts about California population dynamics. We have increasing deaths, but births still outweigh deaths. So we have natural increase in our population. And then California tends to, on net, lose more people to other states than we get from other states. So there's a lot of migration that happens every year, but on net, we lose people to other states. That is outweighed by international immigration. So we benefit from international people landing in California, and that's usually large enough to outweigh the people who leave for other states. In the current situation, we have no idea what's going to happen. We have a pretty good indicator in that international immigration is just really not happening right now. In fact, we were tracking the international student situation very closely. We're tracking the H-1B visa situation very closely. But we know that in 2020, there's going to be very few people coming into the US entirely. Whether or not we see people engaging in geographic arbitrage and leaving for other lower cost states, I'm of two minds of that. On the one hand, we thought that this was going to happen when California raised taxes on higher income earners. And in particular, the 2017 federal tax changes that sort of raised the effective rate on California income earners. We thought that was going to lead to more people migrating out. That really hasn't happened. Maybe the huge demonstration effect of everyone working from home is going to encourage people to move to other states. That would be bad for California. We have an extremely progressive tax system. And in fact, 1/3 of our general fund comes from the top 1% of taxpayers. So about half of all personal income taxes, and personal income taxes make up 2/3 of our general fund, come from the top 1% of taxpayers. So if a lot of extremely wealthy people leave, then we lose a lot in tax revenue. The nice thing that I think protects us a little bit is that California is a wonderful place to be. I mean, I like being in California. I grew up in California. I'm going to stay in California. And if you can afford to live in California, then it's a wonderful place to be. So maybe people won't leave, but we'll see.
Thanks for the really comprehensive answer, Irina. And so there are a couple other questions coming in about sort of drawing inspiration from other regions or states and also collaboration. So here's one. How do these California trends compare to other regions in the US? Oh, I remember, the unemployment predictions. I was curious about the fact that there's a US trend, but then the California trend was so much higher. So how do these trends compare to other regions? And then is there collaboration with other regions when it comes to creating new policies?
Absolutely. So, we are in touch with our fellow policymakers in other states all the time. We are in touch with our congressional delegation all the time. California actually benefits from both having the House Speaker and House Minority Leader being from California. So we are sharing information with them. We are sharing trends with them. California is on a slightly different time scale, I think, than some other states, in that we locked down much earlier than some other states. And that really benefited us in terms of flattening the curve. Unfortunately, it's going the wrong direction right now. We're hopeful that we can flatten that again. But because California is such a large part of the US, we actually mirror overall US trends quite well.
Okay. That makes sense. And of course, there's been a lot of chatter about, this is the next Great Depression. You yourself said that this is a completely unprecedented event. But how hopeful are you that we can come up with unprecedented fiscal and monetary policies to counter these effects?
Well, the federal government, both the Federal Reserve and Congress, have already implemented hugely unprecedented amounts of support. We are hopeful that they will continue that support until the situation gets better. Right now, things that we're very worried about are the expiration of the $600 per week in extra unemployment benefits that expires at the end of July. We think that the payroll protection plan money for small businesses, that probably needs to be extended because 8 weeks of payroll is probably not quite enough to see those small businesses through to the end when they can really reopen. So there are things that we can do that we would like to see happen, but we're working every day to make things better.
Absolutely. There's also, let's see, so there's some interest in asking about real estate. So how does this reflect on, any thoughts on how these trends are going to have an impact on the real estate market in California?
So this has been really interesting. California already had just crazy real estate. One of the metrics that I like to track is the median home sales price of existing single family homes. That's sort of the benchmark, price of housing in California. To look at that median home sales price as a proportion to the median household income. So the median home sales price as a multiple of median household income in the 1980s, that was somewhere around 3 to 4. So that meant that if you look at your annual income, then you could buy a house that was 3 to 4 times your annual income. That metric now for California is somewhere around 8 to 9, which is insane. That means that basically only wealthy people can afford to buy a house in California. There is no county in California, even the tiny little counties, where the median home sales price is below the US median home sales price. We are more than twice as expensive on average, or in terms of medians, than the US as a whole. So that means that wealthy people can continue doing it. In fact, California just hit a new high in terms of that median home sales price. So prices are still going up. If you have money and you are able to work from home, then things are just fine. And interest rates are really low. So it's a great time to buy a house. For lots of other people, rent is going to be a huge issue. The governor put on an eviction moratorium, and several locals have sort of followed up with that. But when those expire, or when that $600 per week in unemployment benefits expires, it's something that kind of keeps me up at night.
I'm sorry to hear that. But I mean, yeah, there's like no real good response to that. But I appreciate the honesty of your answer. So on maybe a more inspiring note, we are at a time where we need to be thinking more creatively in every sector. And so Mike asked, when you look around the world, which countries have economic and maybe tech policies that you admire that you think maybe we can draw inspiration from?
So personal story. As COVID-19 was sort of gaining steam and all of this stuff was happening, I was actually on a trip with my partner. We were going to Australia and New Zealand. And we were about to go to New Zealand. And in the end, we said, okay, we're not going to do the New Zealand thing. We're going to come home. And, initially I was really happy about that. And then New Zealand has completely, they've basically been able to reopen their economy. They are able to attract lots of people to New Zealand to have a burgeoning tech sector there. In terms of countries that I admire that have a good tech sector, I'm not going to call out any particular country. I'll tell you what I think it leads to a good tech sector. One, I've been told by multiple people that one of the reasons why California has Silicon Valley is because we don't enforce non-compete clauses. So if you have someone who is an engineer, who is a software coder, who is one of those drivers of innovation, you can't mistreat them because they can go somewhere else and work for someone else, or they can start their own company. The other thing that tends to lead to innovation is the appropriate regulation of new patents. So we need patents, we need some protection for people to be able to benefit, to give them incentives to innovate. But when that gets too restrictive, that's when you start squashing innovation. And it is one of the things that I think we're going to be struggling with. We talked a little bit about inequality. If larger companies are the only ones who have effective means to innovate and protect their patents because they're big and they have lots of lawyers, that's a problem for innovation. And so you do need some sort of competition regulation regime that allows new flowers to bloom.
Makes sense. And thank you for those just like general guidelines. Yeah, it's there's no clear answer, right? And it's hard to point to one. Every country is different, every situation is different. But those are good to know. Let's see. So we've got a question from Teddy. So there may be a choice for tech employers between finding ways to employ more people or contributing to something like universal basic income. And I'm really glad you explained that. So what are some good ways for tech to employ more people?
So I became a manager probably about 7 years ago. Managing people is hard. But just like with anything else, it is a skill. And so one of the ways in which tech companies can think about how they employ more people, there is more than enough work for everyone. In every situation that I've been in, especially in innovative situations, there is more than enough work for everyone. The hard part is finding the people who can do that work and having a communication mechanism and having a team dynamic where you can get other people to do what you would have done in that situation if you had the time and the information to carry out that information. So in essence, it's kind of a management problem. It's sort of like, how do you share the wealth? How do you share, how do you break it up? How do you almost automate one of these innovation systems in these tech companies so that you can farm out parts of your problem and then bring it back together? And that really is a communication problem. It's sort of like, what do I know that I need to share with my team? What does my team need to understand about the problems facing me so that they can feed up information to me? So, investing in that, and honestly, investing in diversity really helps with that, because that's where you get the best returns to new ideas. If you can figure out how to effectively include people with diverse perspectives, then you can really start employing more people. And then you can, the whole part about employing more people is that you want to, almost bureaucratize your system so that you can have other people act as you do. And so investing in some of that, like, I know sometimes we're busy. We don't want to invest in like understanding those management streams. We don't want to invest that time in trying to figure out like where someone is hanging up. We just sort of like want the perfect person who is a clone of ourselves. But those investments in management and inclusion, they really pay off. So if people are able to do that, then they can employ more people and they can probably grow more.
Absolutely. And you had mentioned before that, like there are systemic issues too. And you just mentioned that these are systemic fixes that people need to be thinking about. I'm curious, we've probably got a lot of people watching this video now who are in a position to make these changes. Do you have advice, or like what is your dream to see them implement? What are things that they can do immediately that they can start doing? While they're thinking long-term systemic changes, what are some immediate changes that you'd be really excited to see?
One, do you pay everyone that you come into contact with a living wage? Is your business model based on the fact that your employees or independent contractors, if that's the way that you're going, are you paying a living wage? Are you giving your independent contractors, for example, the ability to be innovative themselves? Are you sharing enough information with them? One of the things that I was shocked to learn about Uber and Lyft is that they don't tell the drivers how much money they're going to make by accepting a ride. And I thought that that was just a natural thing. If you want to have the drivers compete, if they truly are independent contractors, they should be able to compete. And so do you have a business model that is fair to everyone and pays a living wage? That would be the very first level. And then the second one is, are you offering space for innovation for other people?
Thanks, Irina. This was extremely thought-provoking, and I know the audience was having as good a time as I was, and I hope that we can all continue this discussion on the Slack workspace.
Thanks so much. Take
All
care.
right. Thank you. You too. Audience, thank you again for your participation. There will be another talk starting, and I'm going to be handing over the MC mic to Kevin too.